Welcome back to Cars_Mad. Today I'm going to be talking about the differences between naturally aspirated, turbochargers, and superchargers. So, if you've been living under a rock for the last 30 years and don't know what a turbocharger is, then a turbocharger is basically a thing for making more power. But I'm going to be telling you exactly how it works. So basically you have the exhaust, which drives a turbine. So basically you have the turbine of the turbo, which is on the turbine side of the turbo. So you have the hot side and the cold side. So the hot side is where the turbine is. And that gets spun by exhaust gases flowing through. So the turbo is mounted on a turbo manifold, which is normally slightly different from an exhaust manifold, and is used to direct the exhaust gases into the turbo, and that spins the turbine, which is connected to via a shaft to a compressor wheel, and this pushes the air, or sucks the air and pushes it into the intake manifold, or normally through what's called charge pipes. So it basically goes through them, and those are the charge pipes because it's the charged air, the compressed air that is going through them. And that will often go to your intercoolers. Some older turbo cars do not have intercoolers, but most cars do have intercoolers. Most cars that have turbochargers do have intercoolers. So, an intercooler in basic form is basically just a radiator for the air. So air-to-air intercoolers, what most older turbo cars have, and often most new ones too. Basically the charged air goes through a bunch of fins, and then it's mounted at the front of the car, which has air pushed through it. And it's normally mounted in front of the radiator for better cooling. So that's what an intercooler is, and then you have the charge pipes on the other side of the intercooler that go to your intake manifold. And the intake manifold is basically just a piece of metal that's hollow and has the different tubes to direct it. Look, I'm not going to get into detail on what an intake manifold is, but in basic form, it's just the thing that directs the air into your engine cylinders. But some cars have what's called a water-to-air intercooler. So basically you have a radiator up front that has water or coolant in it, and the air cools that coolant down, and then that coolant goes to another radiator type thing, where that coolant cools down the charged air or the compressed air from the turbocharger, and that's often integrated into the intake manifold for more efficient space. You'll find this on things like the new Toyota Supra, most BMWs, even the new 300 series Land Cruiser has a water-to-air intercooler, and so you have the heat exchanger up front. So that is what the intercooler does. Now, the reason that you want more air to go into your engine is because you want to make more power. And how do you make more power? Well, by putting more air in the engine, you can add more fuel to match that air. And by doing that, you get a bigger explosion or a more powerful explosion, which gives you more power. And that is why a lot of cars, people will turbocharge them aftermarket. But why would a car come factory turbo? Well, same reason, slightly different. The reason that a car will come factory turbo is often actually for fuel efficiency. Sort of. It's to make enough power to be a good car without having a really big, impractical engine that uses lots of fuel. So instead of having a V8, you can have a V6, twin-turbo V6, that makes 400 horsepower. Now, you might be wondering what the advantages of having two turbos is. Well, the main difference and the main reason you would have two turbos is for faster spool. on the turbos for them, because you get turbo lag, which is basically where there's not enough exhaust gases to spin the turbo fast enough. So, you get the turbo. You have two turbos. So one smaller turbo. The smaller the turbo is, the faster it can spool up because there's less room to fill inside that turbocharger before it starts spinning the turbo. So if you have two small ones, then you can just use one small one at low RPMs and use the two at bigger RPMs. So that's the advantages of having twin turbo. Although ball bearing turbos are so good these days that you don't really need one. And you might be wondering what a ball bearing turbo is. It's basically the difference between the bearings. So journal bearing is basically like a metal, like sort of that shaped thing. It's basically it's kind of leaf shaped. It's metal thing. It wraps around the shaft, and it's lubricated by a thin film of oil that keeps it from being metal on metal contact. The ball bearing turbo uses a bunch of tiny little balls that spin around. Now let's talk about superchargers. So a supercharger is like a turbocharger, only it is driven by the engine spinning and not by the exhaust gases. So whilst the turbocharger uses exhaust gases to spin it, a supercharger uses a belt that goes from, generally it's the main accessory belt on the engine, which you just get a new belt when you get a supercharger, bigger one, and that spins the supercharger. Except the supercharger works a little bit different. You have three main types of superchargers, and they all are pretty similar concept. There's one where it is basically like a turbocharger, except it's driven by the engine. It looks exactly like a turbocharger, pretty much. And then you have other ones that have like two little screws in there that basically spin like that and suck the air in and push it into the engine. And they often mount as the intake manifold. Like they often replace the intake manifold, especially on V engines where the intake is on the inside, like it's in the middle of the V. But yeah, a supercharger is basically just like a turbocharger, and often they have an intercooler, a water to air intercooler built into them, and then you have a separate heat exchanger at the front. Yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know. And the naturally aspirated is just having nothing, where the engine just sucks it in through like the airbox side. But that's pretty much everything you need to know about turbos and superchargers. If you have any questions or want me to do another video like this, please let me know in the comments below. And also, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really does help our channel out. Bye for now.